This essential two-foldedness cannot be overcome by invoking a world of ideas as a third element that might transcend this opposition. For I speak only of the actual human being, of you and me, of our life and our world, not of any I in itself, and not of any being in itself. But for an actual human being, the real boundary also runs across the world of ideas. To be sure, some men who in the world of things make do with experiencing and using have constructed for themselves an idea annex or superstructure, in which they find refuge and reassurance in the face of intimations of nothingness. At the threshold they take off the clothes of the ugly weekday, shroud themselves in clean garments, and feel restored as they contemplate primal being, or what ought to be, something in which their life has no share. It may also make them feel good to proclaim it. But the it-humanity that some imagine, postulate, and advertise has nothing in common with the bodily humanity to which a human being can truly say you. The noblest fiction is a fetish, the most sublime fictitious sentiment is a vice. The ideas are just as little enthroned above our heads as they reside inside them. They walk among us and step up to us. Pitiful are those who leave the basic word unspoken, but wretched are those who instead of that address the ideas with a concept or a slogan as if it were their name. That direct relationships involve some action on what confronts us becomes clear in one of three examples. The essential deed of art determines the process whereby the form becomes a work. That which confronts me is fulfilled through the encounter through which it enters into the world of things in order to remain incessantly effective, incessantly it, but also infinitely able to become again a you, enchanting and inspiring. It becomes incarnate. Out of the flood of spaceless and timeless presence, it rises to the shore of continued existence. Less clear is the element of action in the relation to a human you. The essential act that here establishes directness is usually understood as a feeling, and thus misunderstood. Feelings accompany the metaphysical and metapsychical fact of love, but they do not constitute it, and the feelings that accompany it can be very different. Jesus' feeling for the possessed man is different from his feeling for the beloved disciple, but the love is one. Feelings one has. Love occurs. Feelings dwell in man, but man dwells in his love. This is no metaphor, but actuality. Love does not cling to an I as if the you were merely its content or object. It is between I and you. Whoever does not know this, knows this with his being, does not know love, even if he should ascribe to it the feelings that he lives through, experiences, enjoys, and expresses. Love is a cosmic force. For those who stand in it and behold in it, men emerge from their entanglement in busyness, and the good and the evil, the clever and the foolish, the beautiful and the ugly, one after another become actual and a you for them. That is, liberated, emerging into a unique confrontation. Exclusiveness comes into being miraculously again and again, and now one can act, help, heal, educate, raise, redeem. Love is responsibility of an I for a you. In this consists what cannot consist in any feeling, the equality of all lovers, from the smallest to the greatest, and from the blissfully secure whose life is circumscribed by the life of one beloved human being to him that is nailed his life long to the cross of the world, capable of what is immense and bold enough to risk it, to love man. Let the meaning of action in the third example, that of the creature and its contemplation, remain mysterious. Believe in the simple magic of life, in service in the universe, and it will draw on you to what this waiting, peering, stretching of the neck of the creature means. Every word must falsify. But look, these beings live around you, and no matter which one you approach, you always reach being. Relation is reciprocity. My you acts on me as I act on it. Our students teach us, our works form us. The wicked become a revelation when they are touched by the sacred basic word. How are we educated by children, by animals? Inscrutably involved, we live in the currents of universal reciprocity. A question. You speak of love as if it were the only relationship between men. But are you even justified in choosing it as an example? seeing that there is also hatred? An answer. As long as love is blind, that is, as long as it does not see a whole being, it does not yet truly stand under the basic word of relation. Hatred remains blind by its very nature. One can hate only part of a being. Whoever sees a whole being and must reject it is no longer in the dominion of hatred, but in the human limitation of the capacity to say you. It does happen to men that a human being confronts them, and that they are unable to address him with the basic word that always involves an affirmation of the being one addresses. And then they have to reject either the other person or themselves. When entering into relationship comes to this barrier, it recognizes its own relativity, which disappears only when this barrier is removed. Yet whoever hates directly is closer to a relation than those who are without love and hate. This, however, is the sublime melancholy of our lot, that every you must become an it in our world. However exclusively present it may have been in the direct relationship, as soon as the relationship has run its course, or is permeated by means, the you becomes an object among objects, possibly the noblest one, and yet one of them, assigned its measure and boundary. The actualization of the work involves a loss of actuality. Genuine contemplation never lasts long. The natural being that only now revealed itself to me in the mystery of reciprocity has again become describable, analyzable, classifiable, the point at which manifold systems of laws intersect. And even love cannot persist in direct relation. It endures, but only in the alternation of actuality and latency. The human being, who but now was unique and devoid of qualities, not at hand but only present, not experienceable, only touchable, has again become a he or she, an aggregate of qualities, a quantum with a shape. Now I can again abstract from him the color of his hair, of his speech, of his graciousness, but as long as I can do that, he is my you, no longer and not yet again. Every you in the world is doomed by its nature to become a thing, or at least to enter into thinghood again and again. In the language of objects, everything in the world can, either before or after it becomes a thing, appear to some eye as its you. But the language of objects catches only one corner of actual life. The it is the chrysalis, the you the butterfly. Only it is not always as if these states took turns so neatly. Often it is an intricately entangled series of events that is tortuously dual. In the beginning is the relation. Consider the language of primitive peoples, meaning those who have remained poor in objects and whose life develops in a small sphere of acts that have a strong presence. The nuclei of this language, their sentence words, primal pre-grammatical forms that eventually split into the multiplicity of different kinds of words, generally designate the wholeness of a relation. We say, far away. The Zulu has a sentence word that instead means, where one cries, mother, I am lost. And the Fusian surpasses our analytical wisdom with a sentence word of 7 syllables that literally means, they look at each other, each waiting for the other to offer to do that which both desire, but neither wishes to do. In this wholeness, persons are still embedded like reliefs, without achieving the fully rounded independence of nouns or pronouns. What counts is not these products of analysis and reflection, but the genuine, original unity, the lived relationship. We greet those we encounter by wishing them well, or by assuring them of our devotion, or by commending them to God. But how indirect are these worn-out formulas? Hail no longer suggests anything of the original bestowal of power, compared with the eternally young, physical, relational greeting of the kafir. I see you, or its American variant, the laughable but sublime, smell me. We may suppose that relations and concepts, as well as the notions of persons and things, have gradually crystallized out of notions of relational processes and states. The elementary spirit-awakening impressions and stimulations of the natural man are derived from relational processes. the living sense of a confrontation, and from relational states, living with one who confronts him. About the moon which he sees every night, he does not think much until it approaches him bodily, in his sleep or even while he is awake, and casts a spell over him with its gestures, or, touching him, does something wicked or sweet to him. What he retains is not the visual notion of the migratory disk of light, nor that of a demonic being that somehow belongs to it, but at first only an image of the moon's action that surges through his body as a motor stimulus, and the personal image of an active moon crystallizes only very gradually. Only then is the memory of that which was unconsciously absorbed every night kindled into the notion of an agent behind this action. Only then does it become possible for the you, that originally could not be an object of experience, being simply endured, to be reified and become a he or a she. The originally relational character of the appearance of all beings persists and remains effective for a long time. This may help us to understand a spiritual element of primitive life that has been discussed a great deal in recent literature without having been adequately interpreted, that mysterious power whose concept has been found with all sorts of variations in the faith and science, both are still one at this point, of many primitive peoples, that mana or orenda from which we can trace a path all the way to the original significance of Brahman, and even to the dynamies and shairis of the magical papyruses and the apostolic letters. It has been designated as a suprasensible or supernatural force in terms of our categories which do not do justice to those of primitive man. The boundaries of his world are drawn by his bodily experiences, to which the visits of the dead belong quite naturally. Any assumption that the nonsensible exists must strike him as nonsense. The appearances to which he attributes a mystical potency are all the elementary relational processes. That is, all the processes about which he thinks at all, because they stimulate his body and leave an impression of such stimulation in him. The moon and the dead who haunt him at night with pain or lust have this potency. But so do the sun that burns him, the beast that howls at him, the chief whose glance compels him, and the shaman whose song fills him with strength for the hunt. Mana is that which is active and effective, that which has made the moon person up there in the sky a blood-curdling you, that of which a memory trace remained when the impression of a stimulus turned into the impression of an object, although mana itself always appears only in an agent. It is that which we ourselves, if we possess it, say in a miracle stone, can bring about similar effects. The primitive world is magical, not because any human power of magic might be at its center, but rather because any such human power is only a variant of the general power that is the source of all effective action. The causality of his world is not a continuum. It is a force that flashes, strikes, and is effective ever again like lightning, a volcanic motion without continuity. Mana is a primitive abstraction, probably more primitive than numbers, for example, but no more supernatural. Memory, educating itself, constructs a series of the major relational events and the elementary upheavals. What is most important for the drive for preservation, and most noteworthy for the drive for knowledge, namely, that which is active and effective, stands out most clearly and gains independence, while the less important, that which is not shared, the changeful you of the experiences, recedes, remains isolated in man's memory, gradually becomes an object, and even more gradually gets arranged in groups and species. But the third element, gruesomely detached and at times spookier than the dead and the moon, becomes more and more inexorably clear, until finally the other partner that always remains the same emerges. I. The original drive for self-preservation is no more accompanied by any I consciousness than any other drive. What wants to propagate itself is not the I, but the body that does not yet know of any I. Not the I, but the body wants to make things, tools, toys, wants to be inventive. And even in the primitive function of cognition, one cannot find any cognosco ergo sum of even the most naive kind, nor any conception, however childlike, of an experiencing subject. Only when the primal encounters, the vital primal words I acting you and you acting I, have been split, and the participle has been reified and hypothesized, does the I emerge with the force of an element. In the history of the primitive mind, the fundamental difference between the two basic words appears in this. Even in the original relational event, the primitive man speaks the basic word I-you in a natural, as it were still unformed, manner, not yet having recognized himself as an I, but the basic word I-it is made possible only by this recognition, by the detachment of the I. The former word splits into I and you, but it does not originate as their aggregate. It antedates any I. The later originates as an aggregate of I and it. It postdates the I. Owing to its exclusiveness, the primitive relational event includes the I, for by its nature, this event contains only two partners, man and what confronts him, both in their full actuality, and the world becomes a dual system, and thus man begins to have some sense of that cosmic pathos of the I without as yet realizing this. In the natural fact, on the other hand, that will give way to the basic word I-it and I-related experience, the I is not yet included. This fact is the discreteness of the human body as the carrier of its sensations from its environment. In this particularity, the body learns to know and discriminate itself, but this discrimination remains on the plane where things are next to each other, and therefore cannot assume the character of implicit I-likeness. But once the I of the relation has emerged and has become existent in its detachment, it somehow etherealizes and functionalizes itself, and enters into the natural fact of the discreteness of the body from its environment, awakening I-likeness in it. Only now can the conscious I act, the first form of the basic word I-it, of experience by an I, come into being. The I that has emerged proclaims itself as the carrier of sensations, and the environment as their object. Of course, this happens in a primitive, and not in an epistemological manner. Yet once the sentence, I see the tree, has been pronounced in such a way that it no longer relates a relation between a human I and a tree you, but the perception of the tree object by the human consciousness, it has erected the crucial barrier between subject and object. The basic word I-it, the word of separation, has been spoken. A question. Then our melancholy lot took shape in primal history. Indeed, it developed, insofar as man's conscious life developed in primal history. But in conscious life, cosmic being recurs as a human becoming. Spirit appears in time as a product, even a byproduct of nature, and yet it is spirit that envelops nature timelessly. The opposition of the two basic words has many names in the ages and worlds, but in its nameless truth it inheres in the creation. Then you believe, after all, in some paradise in the primal age of humanity? Even if it was a hell, and the age to which we can go back in historical thought was certainly full of wrath and dread and torment and cruelty, unreal it was not. Primal man's experiences of encounter were scarcely a matter of tame delight, but even violence against a being one really confronts is better than ghostly solicitude for faceless digits. From the former, a path leads to God. From the latter, only to nothing.